Set her fork down without a sound. Across the breakfast table, her husband's words hung in the summer air like smoke that wouldn't clear. "I married you because no decent man would have you." Abigail Carter did not cry. She did not shout. She rose from her chair, smoothed her dress with both hands, and curtsied low, precise, and final, as though bidding farewell to a stranger she had never truly known. Then she walked out and never looked back. Subscribe to follow every step of Abigail's journey and drop your city in the comments below. Let me see how far this story travels. The morning Abigail Carter's life changed forever began the way most mornings in that household began, with Lydia Hawthorne finding something wrong. Abigail was cutting her bread when her mother-in-law spoke. "The ham is overcooked again." It wasn't a question. It wasn't even really a complaint. It was a verdict delivered the way Lydia delivered everything, flat certain, and aimed with the precision of a woman who had been practicing all her life. Abigail did not look up from her plate. The ham was prepared by Mrs. Holt, same as every morning. Then Mrs. Holt ought to be spoken to. Lydia reached for her teacup. "Though I suppose the oversight falls to the woman of this house. Does it not?" "It does." Abigail set down her knife. "And I'll speak with her this afternoon." "See that you do." Margaret Carter. Abigail's mother. A woman who had survived worse than Lydia Hawthorne, and carried the scars of it with the quiet dignity of someone who'd decided long ago that surviving was its own kind of victory, poured herself more tea and said nothing. She had learned early in this household that silence was a kind of armor. She wore it every morning without complaint. Lydia had not come for breakfast. She never came for breakfast. She came as she came every morning to audit, to count what was wrong, to weigh and measure the woman her son had married and find her perpetually short. "The linens in the east parlor have not been aired," Lydia said. "They were aired on Tuesday." "Tuesday was 3 days ago, Abigail." "Yes, ma'am, I'm aware of that." "Then you understand they need airing again." Abigail folded her hands in her lap. She breathed once, slow and careful, the way she always did when she felt the edges of herself beginning to sharpen. She had been doing a great deal of that kind of breathing these past 2 years. She had married Samuel Carter in the spring of 1812 when the war with England was a distant rumble, and her father's estate had fallen to debt and grief. It had not been a love match. Everyone at the table knew that. Everyone in the county knew that. It was an arrangement, her father's land in exchange for the Carter name, the Carter money, and a future that would not include her mother sleeping in a borrowed room. She had walked into that marriage with her eyes wide open. She had not expected love. She hadn't even hoped for warmth. But she had expected, perhaps more naively than she would ever admit, to be treated with the basic dignity afforded to any woman who ran a household with competence and grace. 2 summers had taught her that expectation was simply more than Lydia Hawthorne was willing to offer. "Samuel will be down shortly," Lydia said, as though this were a warning. "I know. He has business in town today. I hope breakfast will not delay him." "It won't." The back door swung open. Samuel Carter came in with his jacket half-buttoned and his boots carrying the red dust of the stable yard. He was a tall man, broad across the shoulders, dark-haired with a face that might have been handsome if it had ever learned to soften. 2 years of marriage had not softened it. Neither had one. He sat down without greeting anyone and reached for the coffee pot. "Good morning," Abigail said. "Morning?" He poured his coffee, set the pot down, did not look at her. Margaret looked at her daughter over the rim of her teacup. Abigail did not look back. She kept her eyes on her plate and went on eating her bread with the composed steadiness of a woman who had decided somewhere along the way that expecting to be seen was a luxury she could no longer afford. "I was just telling Abigail that the east parlor linens need airing," Lydia offered pleasantly. "Is that right?" Samuel didn't ask it. He said it the way a man speaks when he's listening to something entirely different inside his own head. "And the ham was overcooked." "Didn't notice." "That is because you are generous, my dear." Lydia smoothed her skirt. "Some of us simply maintain higher standards for what a household ought to be." Abigail set her bread down with great care. I manage this household to the best of my ability, Mrs. Hawthorne. If there are specific concerns you'd like to address, I am happy to discuss them." Lydia smiled. It was the small, tight smile of a woman who had never once needed to raise her voice because she had learned long ago that the real damage could be done in a whisper. "I'm sure you do your best, Abigail. That's all any of us can manage, I suppose." The implication settled on the table between them like a stone dropped in still water. Samuel poured more coffee. He still had not looked at his wife. Abigail set her bread down. She wasn't hungry anymore. "Samuel," Lydia said, shifting in her chair with the ease of a woman who knew exactly where the power in every room lived. "I've been thinking that perhaps we ought to have the Whitfields for supper come August. Colonel Whitfield's daughter has just returned from Philadelphia. Quite accomplished, I'm told." "Fine. Speak with Abigail about the date." "I rather thought you might handle the invitation yourself." He glanced up. "Why?" "Because it would mean more coming from you." Lydia set her cup down. "The Whitfields are quality people. They'll expect a certain standard of—" She paused and let the pause do the work she preferred not to put into actual words. He looked at his mother. He looked at Abigail. He went back to his coffee. What he said next was not delivered cruelly. That was the worst part of it. That was what made it so complete and so thorough and so impossible to argue with. It was delivered the way a man states a fact he has long since grown comfortable with. Quiet, matter of fact, as though explaining the purpose of a chair. "I married Abigail because she was plain enough not to cause trouble," he said. "Plain women make steady wives. The Whitfields know how the world works. Invite them yourself, Mother." The room went still. Margaret Carter put down her teacup. The soft click of china on the table sounded in that silence like a shot. Abigail did not move. She sat exactly where she was, her spine straight, her hands flat on the table on either side of her plate, her face completely, utterly composed. Her eyes did not fill. Her hands did not tremble. She had learned very early in a very hard school not to let anyone see when a blow had landed. But this one had landed. She felt it move through her like something cold and slow and surgical, not a sharp pain, but the particular hurt of a truth delivered without malice, which is always worse than cruelty, because it cannot be argued with. A cruel man can be wrong. A careless one is simply stating what he sees. He had said it the way you describe a horse you purchased for its stamina. Practical. Settled. Done. Lydia was already saying something about the Whitfields' garden. Something about August. Something about whether wine or cider was more appropriate for a supper invitation. Abigail heard none of it. She was very still inside. Not the stillness of shock she had known for a long time in the quiet place, where a woman keeps the things she is not ready to say out loud, yet exactly what she was to this household. But the stillness of a woman who has just heard the last word she intends to hear on a particular subject. She rose from her chair. The movement was so quiet, so entirely controlled, that Lydia kept talking. Only Margaret noticed. Only Margaret watched as her daughter straightened to her full height, smoothed the front of her dress with both hands, the small, precise gesture she'd had since childhood, the one she did when she was composing herself for something, and turned to face the room. Then Abigail Carter curtsied. It was a perfect curtsy. Low. Deliberate. The kind you learn in a parlor under your mother's eye, the kind that carries everything a woman of this era was not permitted to say with words. It was not a curtsy of deference. It was not a curtsy of submission. It was a curtsy of conclusion of a woman completing a chapter and declining to begin the next one. "Excuse me," she said quietly, and she walked out of the dining room. Her bedroom door did not slam. She closed it behind her the same way she had curtsied, controlled, precise, final. She stood in the center of the room with her eyes closed. One breath, two. Then she crossed to the wardrobe and began to pack. She worked quickly and without waste. 2 dresses, the gray wool and the summer muslin, both practical. Her shawl. Her mother's Bible, which had come to her when her father died. Her sewing kit. A change of linen. And her savings. 3 years of small economies coins she had set aside a few at a time from the household accounts, never enough to be noticed, always enough to be building towards something she'd never let herself name until now. She named it now. Out. She had known in the back of her mind, in the quiet room where women keep the things they are not yet ready to say aloud, that a morning like this one might come. She had hoped it wouldn't. She had kept hoping through every slight and every cold morning and every dinner where Samuel answered his mother's quiet cruelties about Abigail with silence or agreement. She had kept hoping because hope was cheaper than despair and considerably less exhausting. But hope had a floor to it. She had found hers this morning. A soft knock came at the door. "Abigail?" Her mother's voice, low and careful. "Come in." Margaret stepped inside. She saw the bag on the bed. She looked at her daughter. She did not say anything for a long moment. "How long have you been planning this?" she asked. "I haven't been planning it." Abigail folded a dress and placed it in the bag. "I've been prepared for it. There's a difference." Margaret came further into the room and closed the door behind her. She watched her daughter pack with the eyes of a woman who understood the distinction between leaving and running away, and had just confirmed with considerable relief which one this was. "Where will you go?" Mrs. Holt's cousin wrote to her last spring about a village in the mountains. Crest Hollow. Small, tight community, good people. They need someone who can keep accounts, settle disputes, manage what wants managing. Abigail smoothed the folded dress. "I can be useful." "You are useful here." "No." She looked up. "I am convenient here. That is not the same thing." Margaret was quiet. The sound of Lydia's voice drifted up faintly from below, some instruction to Mrs. Holt, something about the Whitfield supper. "He didn't mean it the way it sounded," Margaret said at last. Abigail considered that for 2 full steps across the room. Then, "He meant it exactly the way it sounded. That's the problem, Mama. He said it like a man describing a piece of furniture he'd bought for its practicality." She paused. "I have managed every inch of this household for 2 years. I have kept his accounts and settled his disputes and made sure his mother's complaints never reached his ears unless they absolutely had to. I have given him a home that runs like good machinery. And the truest thing he can say about me in front of my own mother is that I am plain enough not to cause trouble." She closed the bag. "I am done being his furniture." Margaret looked at her daughter for a long moment. Something moved behind her eyes, pride and grief, and the particular tenderness a mother holds for a child who has had to learn the hard lessons too soon. She reached over and took Abigail's hands in both of hers. "Come with me to find them," she said softly. "I was about to ask you the same thing." Abigail pressed her mother's hands. "Come with me to Crest Hollow. There's nothing here for either of us. We'll build something better." "How soon?" "This morning." Margaret breathed out slowly. She looked at the bag. She looked at her daughter's face, composed, steady, certain. She nodded once. "Give me 10 minutes," she said. They were down the back stairs and out through the kitchen door before the breakfast dishes had been cleared. Abigail had left a note on the writing desk in Samuel's study. Brief, composed entirely without dramatics. "Samuel, I am leaving. Do not look for me. The household accounts are in order. The linens in the east parlor have been aired. A." She had almost added something about the ham. She had decided against it. The July air outside was thick with heat, and the smell of the fields that stretched behind the Carter estate fields that had once been her father's before the debt took them. She did not look at the fields. She kept her eyes on the road ahead and walked at a pace that said she was going somewhere, not fleeing something. The distinction mattered. She had held it in her mind, the way you hold a lamp in the dark carefully so it wouldn't go out. Margaret fell into step beside her without complaint, her own small bundle tucked under her arm, her hat pulled low against the morning sun. "Did you arrange transport?" "Mrs. Holt's cousin hauls grain to the mountain villages twice a month. He'll take us as far as the Valley Road. There's a stage that runs on Thursdays. Today is Wednesday. Then we'll wait 1 day." Abigail glanced at her mother. "I've waited longer for worse things." Margaret almost smiled. "Yes," she said quietly. "You have." They walked in silence a while. The road was dry and pale beneath the midsummer sun. "Do you think he'll come after you?" Margaret asked. Abigail considered the question the way she considered everything seriously and without the comfort of easy answers. "I think," she said finally, "that a man who explains his marriage the way Samuel did this morning will sleep soundly tonight with the satisfaction of a man who has been honest and will not understand for some time why the house feels different. And when he does understand," she was quiet for a moment. A long, heavy moment, the kind that carried things she hadn't allowed herself to feel yet. "Then we'll face that when it comes," she said. "But I will be a different woman by the time it does. I intend to be." Back at the Carter estate, it was Mrs. Holt who noticed first. She found the study door slightly open, the note on the desk. Both the guest rooms empty. She stood for a long moment in Abigail's bedroom doorway, taking in the orderly room, the neatly closed wardrobe, the swept writing desk. Everything in its precise place. Everything except the woman who had kept it there. She went to find Mr. Carter. He was still at the breakfast table, papers spread across half of it. Accounts correspondence. The business of a man of property in summer. He was reading a letter from his factor when Mrs. Holt appeared. "Mr. Carter?" She paused. "Mrs. Carter and her mother have gone, sir." He looked up. "Gone where?" "I believe they've left the estate." He stared at her. "They've gone visiting." "No, sir." Mrs. Holt folded her hands in front of her. She was a plain-spoken woman who did not enjoy delivering difficult news, but she had done it before, and she brought to it now the same steady decency she brought to everything. "Mrs. Carter left a note. On your desk." He found the note exactly where she said, square in the center, folded once, his name on the front in Abigail's precise, even handwriting. He opened it. Read it. Read it again. "The household accounts are in order. The linens in the east parlor have been aired." He set the note down. He stood with both hands flat on the desk and looked at nothing in particular for a moment that stretched longer than he was comfortable with. "Samuel." Lydia appeared in the doorway. "What has happened?" "Abigail has left." A beat of silence. "Left." She said it the way you repeat a word you're not sure you've heard correctly. "Left where?" "She doesn't say." Lydia crossed the room and reached for the note. He let her take it. He watched her read it, the slight narrowing of the eyes, the small compression of the mouth, and then beneath both, something that might have been satisfaction or might have been discomfort. With Lydia, the two were often close neighbors. "Well?" she said. "Well?" He took the note back. "She's a sensitive woman, Samuel. She probably just needs—" "She's not sensitive." He said it flatly without intending to, and then paused on the truth of what he'd said. Abigail was a great many things. Sensitive was not among them. Sensitive women crumpled. He had watched women crumple, women who wept at a hard word, who retreated to their rooms, who sent messages through intermediaries rather than face a difficult morning head-on. Abigail had never done any of that. She had stood at the head of this household for 2 years with the composure of a woman who had decided before she ever walked through his door that she would not be broken by any of it, and she hadn't been broken. She had simply left. He turned to the window. Outside, the summer morning was full and bright, and completely unchanged, the kind of morning that refused to acknowledge that anything significant had happened in the house behind it. "She'll come back," Lydia said. "Where would she go? She has nothing, no income, no property. She has her mother." He tucked the note into his breast pocket. "And apparently she has somewhere to be. Samuel, you cannot seriously intend to let her—" "She asked me not to look for her." He turned from the window. "I think that's clear enough. You're the head of this household. You have a right. I have a right." He said the word slowly, as though weighing it. "Yes. I have a great many rights, Mother. I've been exercising them for 2 years. He moved toward the door. "I'll be in town. See that Mrs. Holt has what she needs." He walked out before she could answer. He rode to town. He met with his factor. He signed his papers. He ate lunch at the tavern and talked about road repairs with men he'd known his whole life. He did everything he had planned to do that day. And beneath all of it, under the business and the conversation and the long familiar rhythms of a productive summer morning, something else was running. Quiet and persistent, the way water finds its way through stone. The sound of a chair pushing back from a table. Hands smoothing a dress. A curtsy so perfect, it didn't need to say a word. He had not realized until she was gone how much sound she made by being silent. How many things she managed without his noticing. How completely she had arranged herself around this house, his house, without ever once demanding to be seen. He had told himself for 2 years that he had made a practical arrangement, and that Abigail understood practical arrangements. That she was as advertised, steady and uncomplicated and content with what she had been given. He had not asked her. It had not occurred to him to ask. He rode home in the early evening, the heat beginning to break the air, carrying the first suggestion of night. The estate was quiet, orderly, perfectly maintained. It had always been that way. He'd never thought about why. He went to his study, poured a measure of whiskey, sat in his chair, looked at the empty center of his desk where the note had been. He took the note out of his breast pocket and read it a third time. "Do not look for me." She had not written, "I am angry." She had not written, "You have hurt me." She had not appealed to anything, not to his sense of duty, not to his conscience, not to the fact that she was his wife, and had nowhere else to go. She had simply stated, informed, and then managed in a single sentence to communicate that the household would function correctly in her absence because she had made certain of it before she left. Even in leaving, she had thought of the household. Even in leaving, she had taken care of everything. He pressed the note flat on his desk and stared at it for a long time. Outside, the Virginia night was warm and enormous, threaded through with the sound of insects and the distant murmur of the creek. And beyond the fields, beyond the road, somewhere past the places he could name and describe and account for, the mountains rose against the dark sky, blue-black and ancient and indifferent. Somewhere in those mountains, the woman who had kept his household for 2 years was making herself a life. He poured another measure of whiskey. He did not drink it. He sat in the dark of his study, with one hand pressing down on the note, as though he could keep something from escaping it, some last residue of the morning. Some version of himself that had not yet understood what he'd done. For the first time in 2 years of marriage, Samuel Carter thought about his wife. Not about what she provided, not about what she managed, not about what she was in the clean, functional way he had always categorized her. He thought about who she was, and found to his considerable and growing discomfort that he did not know. He had lived with this woman for 2 years, had eaten at the same table, had walked the same halls, had trusted the same house to her hands. And he could not tell you what she loved to read. Could not tell you what made her laugh. Could not tell you, had never once asked whether she was happy. He had not asked because he had not thought to ask. He pressed his palm flat against his breast pocket, against the folded note inside it, and sat for a long time in the dark while the whiskey went untouched and the house settled around him. Perfectly ordered, perfectly quiet. Perfectly empty. The way it always was. The way she had made it. And the particular weight of that understanding settled into Samuel Carter's chest. Slowly, the way real things always settle, not like a blow, but like a stone sinking through deep water, taking its time, going all the way to the bottom. The grain wagon smelled of burlap and dried corn, and it swayed on every rut in the mountain road with a kind of cheerful indifference that Abigail found after the first hour almost comforting. Daniel Holt, Mrs. Holt's cousin, a broad-shouldered man with a sunburned neck and the unhurried manner of someone who had never once in his life been in a hurry, handled the horses with the easy competence of a man born to it, and he did not ask questions. That alone was enough to make Abigail like him considerably. Margaret had fallen asleep against Abigail's shoulder, somewhere past the first ridge. She hadn't slept well in the Carter house. Abigail knew, that had known it for months, had watched her mother grow thinner and quieter with each passing season, and the rocking of the wagon had done what the Carter estate never could. Abigail kept still, so she wouldn't wake her. Daniel Holt glanced back once. "You ladies comfortable back there?" "We're fine, thank you. Road gets rougher past Henson's Mill, just so you know." "We'll manage." He nodded and turned back to his horses. That was all. No curiosity about where they'd come from or why two women with small bundles and no male escort were riding a grain wagon into the mountains at sunrise. He simply drove and let them be what they were, which was grateful. Abigail sat with her mother's weight against her shoulder and her hands folded in her lap and watched the road ahead. She did not think about Samuel. She tried not to think about Samuel. She thought instead about Crest Hollow, what Mrs. Holt had said about it, what the cousin's letter had described. A small community of farmers and tradespeople tucked into a valley between two ridges. A place where people knew each other by name and settled their own disputes and didn't much care for outside interference. A place Mrs. Holt had said with a certain emphasis that Abigail had understood perfectly, where a capable woman was worth more than her looks. She had read that letter twice and kept it folded in her Bible. It was the only invitation she'd needed. Margaret stirred. "Are we close?" "Not yet. Sleep." "I wasn't sleeping." "You were snoring." "I don't snore." Margaret straightened and pressed a hand to her hat. "I was resting my eyes." With sound effects. Margaret looked sideways at her daughter. A small, dry smile crossed her face, the first real smile Abigail had seen from her in months. "You're in a fine mood for a woman who packed her whole life into one bag this morning." "I feel fine." "You feel free," Margaret said quietly. "There's a difference." Abigail looked at the road ahead. "Yes," she said after a moment. "I suppose there is." They reached Crest Hollow late the following afternoon, the day after a night spent at a modest inn on the valley road, where the innkeeper's wife had fed them cornbread and asked no questions and charged them a fair price. The stage had been on time, which Abigail noted with the satisfaction of a woman who appreciated competence in all its forms, and the driver had set them down at the top of a narrow road that wound down into a valley that smelled of wood smoke and green things, and the particular cleanness of mountain air. Abigail picked up her bag and walked down into it. The first person they encountered was a boy of about 12, sitting on a fence post with a piece of straw in his mouth, watching them approach with the frank, unabashed curiosity of a child who had not yet learned that staring was rude. "You lost?" he asked. "No," Abigail said. "We're looking for a man named Eli Thompson." The boy looked at her bag, looked at Margaret's bag, looked back at Abigail with the calculating expression of a child who understood that women with bags looking for Eli Thompson probably had a story to them. "He's at the mill," the boy said. "End of the road, turn left at the big oak." "Thank you." "You stayin'?" "That remains to be seen." He seemed to find this answer satisfying. He nodded once as though she'd confirmed something he'd suspected and went back to his straw. Eli Thompson was not what Abigail had expected, though she couldn't have said precisely what she'd expected. He was perhaps 60, lean and weathered, with hands that had been doing hard work for so long that they'd taken on the texture of the work itself. He looked up from whatever he was mending when she came around the corner of the mill, and he looked at her the way people in small communities look at strangers, not unfriendly, but thorough. "Mr. Thompson," she said. "I'm Abigail Carter. Mrs. Holt's cousin told her you might have need of someone who can keep accounts and manage disputes. I understand you've had some trouble with the boundary fencing on the east parcels." He looked at her for a long moment. "Your husband know you're here." "My husband knows I'm gone. The details are my own business." Another long look. Then something in his face settled, not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "You want some water? It's a warm day for traveling." "I'd appreciate that." He went inside and came back with 2 cups. He handed one to Margaret and one to Abigail, and leaned against the door frame with his arms crossed. "The east parcel trouble," he said. "How'd you hear about that?" "Mrs. Holt's cousin mentioned it in a letter. 3 families disputing the same fence line, if I understood correctly. 4, actually. Jeb Harmon reckoned he'd join in once he saw the others were making noise about it. Is there a deed record? There's 4 of them, all different, all claiming the same 20 feet of ground. Then the deed records are useless as they stand. You need a surveyor or someone who can read the county map against the original grant boundaries. She took a sip of water. I can read maps. Eli Thompson looked at her over the rim of his cup. Can you now? My father was a land surveyor before he was a farmer. He taught me to read a county map before I could read a proper book. She met his eyes. Mr. Thompson, I am not here to cause trouble. I am here because I am useful, and I have a mother who needs a quiet place to rest, and I can earn my way. That is the beginning and the end of my situation. If this community has no need of any of that, I'll take the stage back down on Thursday and trouble you no further. He was quiet for a moment. The mill wheel turned slowly somewhere nearby. A dog barked once in the middle distance and went quiet. There's a room above the Harmon widow's house, Eli Thompson said. She rents it for fair, and I reckon we can start with those deed records in the morning if you've a mind. Abigail set down her cup. I have a mind, she said. 3 days into Crest Hollow, Abigail understood something she hadn't let herself name while she was living inside the Carter house. She had been making herself small for 2 years. Not deliberately, not with the conscious decision of a woman who knew she was doing it, but slowly, incrementally, the way you don't notice a room getting darker until someone opens a window and the light comes flooding back. The window had been Eli Thompson spreading 4 contradictory deed maps across his work table and stepping back and saying simply, "All right, Mrs. Carter, show me what you see." She had shown him. It had taken her 40 minutes. She had laid the maps against each other, traced the original grant lines, identified the surveying error that had generated the discrepancy. A misread bearing from 20 years back that had propagated through every subsequent deed. Like a fault line, nobody had thought to check, and by the end of it, Eli had his arms crossed and the faint expression of a man revising a calculation he'd thought was settled. "You said you could read maps," he said. "I said that, yes. You didn't say you could solve a problem that's had 4 families at each other's throats for 6 years. You didn't ask." He looked at her. "No," he said. "I didn't." Word moved fast in Crest Hollow. By that evening, 2 more people had found reasons to stop by the Harmon widow's house with questions for the woman staying upstairs. A man whose fence line crossed a public road. A woman whose neighbor's well had started encroaching on a shared easement. A young couple who'd been sold a parcel they were now being told was encumbered by a prior claim and didn't know what that meant or what to do about it. Abigail sat at the kitchen table with Margaret passing her tea, and she listened to every one of them. Asked questions. Took notes in her neat, precise handwriting. Didn't promise anything she couldn't deliver. Didn't offer comfort where practical action was more useful. By the end of the week, she had more work than she could finish in a month. Margaret watched all of it with the quiet, careful eyes of a woman collecting evidence. She didn't say anything until the last visitor had gone, and Abigail was sitting at the table with her notes spread around her, her hair loose, her sleeves rolled, looking more like herself than Margaret had seen her look in 2 years. "He had no idea, did he?" Margaret said. Abigail looked up. "Huma, Samuel." A pause. Abigail looked back at her notes. "No," she said. "He didn't." "Did you?" Abigail was quiet for a moment. She picked up her pencil and set it back down. "I knew what I could do," she said. "I suppose I'd forgotten somewhere in there that it was allowed to matter." Margaret reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with her own. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. Back at the Carter estate, things were not going well. It wasn't that the household had collapsed. Mrs. Holt was competent and loyal, and had been running the practical mechanics of the house long enough to manage without direction. The meals were prepared, the rooms were cleaned, the fires were laid. But there was a difference. A quiet, insistent, impossible-to-name difference between a house that is managed and a house that is run. Abigail had run it. She had not merely assigned tasks and supervised their completion. She had understood the house as a living thing, anticipating what it needed, before it needed it, adjusting and balancing and calibrating in dozens of small ways that no one had ever noticed precisely because they were done so well that nothing ever went wrong. Now things went wrong, not dramatically, not in any single catastrophic way that Samuel could point to and address, but in the accumulated friction of small misalignments, the correspondence that piled up because no one had organized the factors' letters in the right order. The household accounts that didn't balance the way they used to, because the system Abigail had developed for tracking expenditures existed entirely in her handwriting, and no one else understood it. The visiting neighbor who arrived for a scheduled tea that no one had remembered to cancel because it had been in Abigail's diary and not on Samuel's desk. He came downstairs one morning a week after she'd gone and found Lydia in the study going through the account books with the focused expression of a woman who had found them wanting. "Mother, these accounts are a disaster," she said without looking up. "Abigail kept those accounts." "I'm aware of that." She looked up then. "Which is precisely why they're a disaster. There's a system here, Samuel, but it's hers, and I cannot make head nor tail of. Leave them." He crossed the room and closed the account book. "I'll handle it." "You don't know her system." "Then I'll learn it." He picked up the book. "Or I'll find another way." Lydia sat back. She looked at her son with the particular look she reserved for situations where she knew she was right and had the patience to wait for the rest of the world to come around. "She's not coming back on her own, you know." "You don't know that. I know Abigail Carter." She folded her hands. "I've been underestimating her since the day you brought her into this house. I think we can agree I know her better than I let on." She paused. "She is not a woman who says a thing she doesn't mean. She said, 'Do not look for her.' She meant it." Samuel said nothing. The question. Lydia continued with the slow deliberateness of a woman making a point she has been building toward for some time, is whether you intend to respect that or whether you intend to go after her. "She asked me not to." "Yes," Lydia stood. "And you've been sitting in this study every evening for a week staring at a note she wrote you, a short note, on half a page, that you've read so many times the fold is wearing through." She smoothed her skirt. "I am many things, Samuel. A fool is not among them." He didn't answer. She walked to the door, stopped, didn't turn around. "For what it's worth," she said, and her voice was different now, quieter, scraped down to something that sounded almost like honesty. "What you said at that table was beneath you. I did not realize it at the time. I am telling you now that I do." She paused. "Whether that changes anything is entirely your business." She left. Samuel stood alone in his study with Abigail's account book in his hands, and his mother's words sitting in the room like furniture that had been rearranged while he wasn't looking. He opened the account book. He looked at Abigail's handwriting, her careful, precise, utterly organized system, and he saw for the first time not just the what of it, but the how, the care, the thought, the dozens of small decisions that had gone into building something that worked so well it had been invisible. He stood there for a long time reading. The letter arrived in Crest Hollow on a Wednesday morning 3 weeks after Abigail had. It came through the general store addressed to her in handwriting she didn't recognize, formal, slightly stiff, with a return address from Charlottesville. She opened it at the kitchen table, while Margaret poured coffee and pretended not to be watching. It was from Samuel's solicitor. It informed her in the careful language of a man who understood exactly what his words meant, and had chosen them with the precision of someone who expected them to land hard. That Mr. Carter wished to confirm the terms of the marital arrangement with regard to the matter of the Meadows land, which had been her father's, and which had become part of the Carter estate upon the occasion of their marriage. That in the event of the solicitor had written separation, and then crossed it out, and written extended absence, certain questions of property would need to be addressed. Abigail read it twice. Then she folded it very carefully, set it on the table, picked up her coffee, drank it. Well, Margaret said, Samuel sent his solicitor. Margaret sat down. Is he threatening to? No. She set down her cup. He's reminding me that the land is his. My father's land. The fields I grew up running through. He's reminding me that they belong to him now. She looked at the letter. I don't think he meant it as a threat. I think he meant it the way he means most things, as a statement of fact. As a way of explaining the shape of things as he sees them. What will you do? Abigail was quiet for a moment. The kind of quiet that has weight to it. Nothing, she said at last. Nothing, not yet. She picked up the letter and folded it again, smaller this time, and tucked it into the pocket of her apron. He wants to know if the land will move me. He wants to know if the threat of losing it will make me come back. She stood and picked up her coffee. Let him wonder. Margaret stared at her daughter. Abigail, I know what I'm doing, Mama. Do you? She stopped. She turned back. And for just a moment, just one unguarded, unarmored moment, the composure dropped and Margaret saw what was underneath it. Not weakness, not fear, but the particular ache of a woman who has been required to be strong for so long that she's almost forgotten what it felt like to be held. I know enough, Abigail said quietly. That's what I have. And right now, it's what I need. Eli Thompson found her that afternoon, behind the mill, cross-referencing a county survey map against the deed descriptions for the Harmon parcel dispute. He watched her work for a moment before she noticed him. You all right? He asked. I'm fine. You've got the look of a woman who got a letter she didn't care for. She kept her eyes on the map. Does that change the survey work? No. He lowered himself onto the bench beside her with the ease of a man whose joints had long since made peace with the business of sitting down. Doesn't change the work. Just wondering after you is all. She was quiet for a moment. Then, my husband's solicitor wrote. Ah. About the land. My father's land. Eli nodded slowly. And your husband, he's the kind of man who leads with property. He's the kind of man who leads with what he knows, she said. Property he understands. People. She paused. People are harder for him. You sound like you're defending him. I'm describing him. She looked up from the map. There's a difference. I know the difference better than almost anyone. Eli studied her face for a moment with the unhurried attention of a man who had lived long enough to know what patience looked like on a person and what it cost. He's gonna come, Eli said. Sooner or later. Men like that always come. I know. What'll you do when he does? She looked back at the map. She traced a survey line with her fingertip, a straight, certain boundary, clear as anything. I'll be someone different than the woman he married, she said. And he'll have to decide what to do with that. Different how? She was quiet for a long moment. Then, very softly, in the voice of a woman who had found something she hadn't realized she'd lost, myself. Eli Thompson nodded. He looked out at the road. Well then, he said. You'd better get back to those deed descriptions. The Harmon meeting's on Friday, and Jeb Harmon is a man who needs his facts in a row before he'll agree to anything. I know. She was already writing. He left her to it. The twist came on a Friday evening when Abigail was walking back from the Harmon meeting, which had gone better than anyone had expected. The four families having agreed to a resurvey based on the original grant lines, a resolution that had taken 6 years to arrive at, and 40 minutes in Abigail's company to arrange. And she was stopped at the crossroads by a rider she didn't recognize. He was young Dusty from the road, and he looked at her with the slightly desperate expression of a man who had been given a message and is not entirely sure he's found the right person. Ma'am Abigail Carter. She stopped. Yes. I've a letter for you. He reached into his coat and produced an envelope. Not the solicitor's careful cream stationery this time. Plain paper. Her name on the front in handwriting she knew very well. Samuel's handwriting. She took it. She didn't open it. She stood at the crossroads with the letter in her hand and looked at the writer. "Is there a reply expected?" she asked. He said to wait for your answer, ma'am, if you had one." She looked at the envelope for a long moment. The sun was going down. The mountains caught the last of it, and held it the way mountains hold everything quietly, without comment, without any sense that the human drama unfolding at their feet was of particular significance. She opened the letter. It was short. 3 lines. Not a solicitor's language, not a statement of property rights or legal arrangements, just his handwriting slightly less controlled than usual, as though it had been written quickly, or written and rewritten before this version survived. "I said something at breakfast that I have been unable to account for since. I am not asking you to come back. I am asking if you would permit me to say what I should have said instead. S." She read it once. She folded it. She stood at the crossroads for a moment in the last of the evening light, with the letter in her hand and the mountains at her back, and 3 weeks of herself, the real herself, the capable and certain and quietly joyful version of herself that she had been rebuilding from the ground up, standing around her like something she wasn't willing to trade. She looked at the writer. "Tell Mr. Carter," she said, "that I received his letter." The writer waited. "And is that all, ma'am?" She thought about it for one long, careful moment. "For now," she said. "That's all." She walked back toward the Harmon widow's house with the letter in her pocket, and her chin up, and her step even, and she did not hurry, and she did not look back, and she did not let herself think. Not yet, not tonight, about the fact that her hands were not entirely steady. She thought instead about the survey map waiting on the kitchen table, about the 3 other cases she had promised to look at next week, about the Harmon family, shaking hands around a table where 6 years of dispute had finally, in the space of one honest conversation, come to rest, about what it meant to be a woman who solved the things in front of her and didn't wait for someone else to decide they were worth solving. She kept walking. The mountains closed around the valley behind her, dark and enormous and utterly indifferent to the small, specific, irreversible thing that was happening inside the chest of one woman finding her way home to herself. Margaret was at the kitchen table when she came in. She looked up. She saw Abigail's face. What happened? Abigail set her bag down. She sat in the chair across from her mother. She put Samuel's letter on the table between them. Margaret read it. She read it again. She set it down. "Well," she said. "Well." Abigail agreed. Margaret looked at her daughter. "What do you want, Abigail? Not what's practical, not what's wise. What do you want?" The question sat between them in the lamplight, quiet and enormous, and requiring for once a completely honest answer. Abigail looked at it for a long time before she opened her mouth. The question Margaret had asked sat on the kitchen table between them like something alive. Abigail looked at it, looked at the letter beside it, looked at her mother's face, patient, careful, asking for the truth and not the managed version of it. "I don't know," she said at last. Margaret blinked. In 27 years of knowing her daughter, she had not heard Abigail say those words very often. Abigail was a woman who knew, who decided, who arrived at her conclusions through a disciplined internal process and then committed to them without ceremony. "I don't know," it was not in her usual vocabulary. "That's the most honest thing you've said all week," Margaret said quietly. "I know what I don't want." Abigail pressed her palms flat on the table. "I don't want to go back to being convenient. I don't want to sit at a breakfast table waiting to be described. I don't want to manage a house for a man who looks through me the way you look through a window." She stopped. "But I also—" She stopped again. "Also what?" She folded the letter, put it back in her pocket, stood up. "Also nothing, not tonight." She picked up her lamp. "I'll write to him in the morning." Margaret watched her go upstairs. She looked at the spot where the letter had been. She said nothing, but her expression in the lamplight was that of a woman who understood exactly what also nothing meant, and knew that whatever came next was going to be considerably more complicated than either of them was letting on. Abigail's reply to Samuel's letter was 4 sentences long. She wrote it standing at the kitchen table the next morning before Margaret was awake, and she read it once, and she sealed it before she could change a word of it. Mr. Carter, I received your letter. I am not prepared to discuss what you should have said at a breakfast table 3 weeks ago. If you have something to say, you know where I am. Whether you come is your decision, not mine. A Carter. She sent it with the writer and went back to her survey maps. She told herself for the better part of 4 days that she had no expectation of what would follow. She was a moderate liar, Maricund. Samuel Carter rode into Crest Hollow on the 6th day of August on a horse that had earned its rest and in a state of mind that had not. He had told himself for most of the 4-day ride that he was coming because of the accounts, because of the property, because a man had certain responsibilities to his household arrangements, and those arrangements required at minimum a conversation. He had rehearsed sensible, measured things to say. He had practiced them in his head to the rhythm of the horse's hooves on the mountain road. By the time he crossed into the valley, he had stopped rehearsing. The first person he asked for directions from was the boy on the fence post, who was apparently a permanent feature of Crest Hollow's entrance, stationed there with the same straw in his mouth and the same frank assessing stare. I'm looking for a woman named Abigail Carter, Samuel said. The boy looked at his horse, looked at his clothes, looked at his face with the uncanny precision of a child who has been paying attention to adults for long enough to read them reasonably well. You her husband, the boy said. A pause. Yes. The boy chewed his straw. She's at the mill, settling the Harmon business. Is she? It came out flatter than he intended. She's been settling everybody's business, the boy said without particular judgment. She's good at it. Samuel looked at him for a moment. I'll find the mill. Turn left at the big oak. He turned left at the big oak. Chag. He heard her before he saw her. Her voice came through the open door of the mill, calm, clear, carrying the particular authority of someone who is not performing authority but simply has it. He stood outside and listened for a moment he hadn't planned on. Mr. Harmon, I understand the north fence has been your family's understanding for 30 years. I'm not disputing what your father believed. I'm telling you what the original grant survey says, and those are 2 different things. The survey doesn't care what your father believed. A man's voice rougher, defensive. My father built that fence himself, and he built it in the right spirit and the wrong location, 11 feet south of where the grant line actually sits. A pause. Which means, incidentally, that you have 11 feet more land than you thought you did on the western side. So this is not entirely bad news, Mr. Harmon. Silence. Then a sound that might have been a grudging laugh. Samuel stepped into the doorway. Wow. She was standing at a long table with 4 men arranged around it. Maps spread between them, and she was pointing at something with the focused, unself-conscious authority of a woman who was entirely in her element. Her hair was pinned less precisely than it had been in the Carter house. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbow. She looked in the plain, honest light of a summer afternoon more alive than he had ever seen her. She looked up and saw him. The room went very still. He watched her face, that face he knew so well and had somehow never learned to read, move through something. Not shock, not pleasure, not anger. Something more contained than any of those and more complicated. Mr. Carter, she said. Mrs. Carter. He was aware of 4 pairs of eyes moving between them, with the alert interest of people who understood they were witnessing something that wasn't their business and were going to watch it anyway. I apologize for interrupting. We're nearly finished. She looked back at Jeb Harmon. The resurvey will take place next Thursday. I'll be there to confirm the markers. Does that satisfy you? Harmon looked at Samuel, looked at Abigail, looked at Samuel again. Yes, ma'am, he said. Reckon it does. The 4 men filed out. The last one, Jeb Harmon, paused in the doorway, just long enough to give Samuel the particular look of a man assessing another man's worth and arriving at a preliminary conclusion. Then he walked out and left them alone. Shut. The silence between them was not empty. It was packed full of everything neither of them had said in 2 years of marriage and 4 weeks of absence, and it had weight to it, and edges. "You came," Abigail said. She began rolling up the survey map with steady hands. "You said if I had something to say, I knew where you were. I did say that." She set the rolled map aside. She looked at him directly, the way she had always looked at him, clear and level, giving nothing away that she hadn't decided to give. "Do you have something to say?" He had rehearsed this. He had spent 4 days on a horse preparing for this exact moment. "I owe you an apology," he said. She waited. "What I said at breakfast. I know what you said at breakfast. I need to say it was wrong." "Wrong how?" She crossed her arms, not defensively, more the posture of a woman settling in to listen carefully. "Wrong, because it wasn't true, or wrong because it was true, and you should have kept it to yourself." He opened his mouth, closed it. That was a question he had not rehearsed for, and it was, he understood immediately, the exact right question. The only question that mattered. "Wrong," he said slowly, "because it was—" He stopped, started again. "Because even if it was how I thought of things, it should never have been. I should never have. You were sitting right there, and your mother was right there, and I said it like it was nothing. Like you were nothing." He looked at her. "You are not nothing, Abigail. You have never been nothing, and I said that at a breakfast table without thinking, and I have been unable to unsay it since." The mill was very quiet. Somewhere outside, one of the Harmon men was talking to someone about Thursday's resurvey. "No," Abigail said finally. "You can't unsay it." "I know." "That's not an apology, Samuel. That's a man explaining why he feels bad." He felt that one. What would an apology look like? She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face, something that wasn't quite forgiveness, and wasn't quite refusal, and was perhaps the particular territory that exists between two people who know each other well enough to hurt each other and are trying to figure out what to do with that knowledge. "I don't know yet," she said. "I haven't decided." Eli Thompson found Samuel at the general store an hour later. He had not gone looking for him. He had simply arrived to collect the week's grain order and found a man sitting on the bench outside with the expression of someone who has had a conversation that rearranged things and is waiting for the dust to settle. Eli set down his order and looked at him for a moment. "You her husband," he said. It wasn't a question. Samuel looked up. "Eli Thompson." "That's right." Eli sat on the bench beside him with the unhurried ease of a man who didn't waste movement. "She told me you'd come." "Did she?" "Said probably sooner or later. Men like you always do." He looked out at the road. "She didn't say it mean for what it's worth. Just practical." Samuel was quiet for a moment. "How is she?" "Better than when she got here." Eli said it plainly without apology. She came in with 2 bags and a mother and a set of shoulders that were carrying about 4 years more than they should have been. 3 weeks later, she's settled a 6-year property dispute, reorganized the widow Harmon's household accounts, and taught the school teacher's eldest to read a county map. He paused. "She smiles now. Didn't used to, I reckon." Samuel said nothing. The truth of that sat on him like something heavy. "What do you want from her?" Eli asked. "And I mean that plain. Not what you're telling yourself you want. What do you actually want?" Samuel looked at the road. A wagon was passing a family, a woman with a child on her lap, laughing at something, the man beside her with his hand on her knee without thinking about it, the casual, unconscious tenderness of 2 people who were in the habit of each other. "I want to know her," Samuel said. And it surprised him, saying it out loud, how true it was, how long it had been true without his knowing it. "I have lived with this woman for 2 years and I do not know her. I did not try to know her. I arranged a marriage and I maintained it, and I told myself that was sufficient." He paused. It was not sufficient. Eli looked at him for a long time. "No," he said. "It wasn't." He stood up and retrieved his grain order. "She's staying at the widow Harmon's. There's a room at Deacon's place east end of the road if you need it. He started to walk, stopped. One more thing, Mr. Carter. Yes. She's not the woman you married. He said it without malice, but clearly. I mean that straight. Whatever you think you know about Abigail Carter, she's further than that now. Don't make the mistake of talking to who she was. He walked away. Samuel sat on the bench for a long time after that. The first twist came the following morning, and it came from the last direction Samuel had anticipated. He was at the breakfast table at Deacon's when Margaret Carter walked in. He had not seen his mother-in-law since the morning Abigail left. He had not thought much in the chaos of the weeks following about Margaret, specifically about what she had witnessed at that table, about what it had meant to her, about the fact that she had packed her bags and walked out alongside her daughter without saying a single word to him. She stood in the doorway of Deacon's dining room and looked at him with the composed, careful expression of a woman who had prepared herself for this encounter. "Mrs. Carter," he said. He stood. "Sit down, Samuel." She came in and sat across from him. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at him the way a woman looks at a man she has made a decision about and is now confirming. "Margaret, before you say anything," she said, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen to it and not respond until I've finished. Can you do that?" He nodded. "Abigail's father came to your father to propose the arrangement," she said. "You know that part. What you don't know, what nobody has told you because I told Abigail not to, and she listened to me, and I have regretted it for 2 years, is that the week before the wedding, your mother wrote my daughter a letter." Samuel went very still. "It was a polite letter," Margaret continued. "Lydia is too careful for anything else. It thanked Abigail for her willingness to enter the arrangement. It outlined what would be expected of her as the Carter wife. And then, in the last paragraph, in that particular way your mother has, of saying something devastating, as though it's simply practical. It told Abigail that Samuel was marrying for stability and convenience, not for sentiment, and that Abigail should calibrate her expectations accordingly." She paused. "She told my 22-year-old daughter 1 week before her wedding day not to expect to be loved." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Abigail read that letter," Margaret said, "and she folded it, and she put it away, and she walked into that marriage anyway, because she had made a commitment, and she intended to honor it. And she spent 2 years in your house honoring it, honoring a commitment she had been told in writing before it even began, was not going to be reciprocated." Her voice was steady. It was the steadiest, most controlled voice Samuel had ever heard, and it was absolutely furious underneath. "She never told you. She thought if she worked hard enough, if she was useful enough, if she managed your house well enough that eventually the terms would change." Samuel said nothing. He could not speak. Something was moving in his chest that didn't have a word for it yet. She was not waiting to be loved, Samuel. Margaret leaned forward slightly. She had stopped expecting it. She was waiting to be seen. That's all she ever wanted. Just to be seen. She sat back. "And instead, on a Tuesday morning in July, you told her she was plain enough not to cause trouble." The silence that followed was enormous. "I didn't know about the letter," he said. "It came out quieter than he intended. Rougher." "I know you didn't." Margaret looked at him. "I am not telling you this to make you feel worse. I'm telling you because you came all this way, and you are about to try to apologize to my daughter, and you cannot do that properly if you don't understand the full size of what you're apologizing for." She stood. "She doesn't know I've told you this. That's your business how you use it." She walked toward the door. "Margaret." She stopped. He looked up at her. "I'm sorry, for all of it. For what she experienced in that house. For what you experienced. For the letter my mother wrote, and for never—" He stopped. His throat was doing something inconvenient. "For never asking." Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Her expression was not forgiving. It was not cold either. It was the expression of a woman who is watching something decide whether it's going to become something better and has not yet decided how much hope to invest in it. "That's a start," she said. She walked out. He found Lydia's letter that afternoon. He hadn't gone looking for it. He had written to Lydia after his conversation with Margaret a short direct letter asking in the plainest language he could manage whether what Margaret had described was accurate. Lydia's reply arrived the following morning, and he read it standing in Deacon's hallway. She did not deny it. Lydia was too honest for outright denial. She explained in her precise, careful prose that she had been protecting Samuel's interests, that Abigail had been a practical choice for practical reasons, and she had simply wanted the girl to understand the terms, that she had meant no unkindness, that she could not have anticipated that Abigail would take it as she apparently had. He folded the letter. He stood for a long moment. Then he walked the length of the road to the widow Harmon's house and knocked on the door. Abigail answered it herself. She looked at his face, one quick assessing look, and something shifted in her expression. "What happened?" "My mother wrote you a letter." He said it straight, no approach, no preparation. "Before the wedding. I didn't know about it. I know about it now. And I need you to tell me what it said from your own mouth because I want to hear it from you." Her face changed. It went very still in a way that was different from her usual composure. This was the stillness of something old and carefully contained, something she had kept managed for 2 years and was now being asked to put down. "Come inside," she said quietly. They sat in the widow Harmon's parlor with the door open, and Margaret conspicuously absent, and Abigail told him about the letter. She told him without dramatics, without tears. In the same clear, even voice she used when she was describing a survey problem or a deed discrepancy. Just the facts, the sequence, the specific words she remembered from a paragraph she had read on a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1811 and had never fully put down since. He listened. He did not interrupt. He did not defend. He sat across from her, and he listened to the story of the 2 years he had lived through from her side of it, and it was like looking at a room you'd always seen in daylight and discovering in a different light that it had contained things you'd walked past 100 times without noticing. When she was finished, the room was quiet. "I should have told you," she said. "I know that. You had no reason to believe it would have mattered to me." She looked at him. "No," she said. "I didn't." That landed the way it was meant to. "I'm going to say something," he said, "and I need you to hear it as what it is, and not as what it resembles something you've heard before." He leaned forward. "I am sorry. For the letter my mother wrote. For the morning at breakfast. For 2 years of treating you like the arrangement and not the person. For not asking, for not seeing." He paused. "For all the mornings I reached for the coffee and didn't say good morning. For all the dinners I let my mother say things and said nothing. For never, not once, asking you what you wanted." His voice had gone rough at the edges. "I am sorry for all of it, Abigail. Every piece of it." She looked at him for a long time. "I know you are," she said finally. "Is that enough?" The question sat between them. She didn't look away from it. "No," she said. "Not yet. It's not enough yet." She stood. She moved to the window, not escaping, just needing the small distance of standing. "But it is something, Samuel. It is more than I expected, and that—" She paused. "That is not nothing." He stood too. "I'm not asking you to come back tomorrow. I'm not asking you to forgive everything before you're ready. I'm asking for— I don't know what I'm asking for exactly." He stopped. He was, she realized, lost, not performing lostness. Actually, genuinely uncertain, a man who had lived his whole life with the architecture of confidence and was standing now without a plan. She had never seen him without a plan. "Samuel." She turned from the window. "Why did you come? The real reason. Not the apology. You could have written that. Why did you ride 4 days into the mountains?" He looked at her. "Because I could not stand not knowing where you were." The breath she took was quiet, almost inaudible. "Because every morning, he said, I came downstairs and the house was running, and it was exactly right and exactly wrong at the same time. And I didn't understand for 2 weeks why, and then I understood." He looked at his hands. then at her. Because it's not the house I miss, Abigail. It's you. Specifically. Distinctly. You. He paused. And I have never said that to anyone in my life, and I have no idea what to do with it, but I am asking you to let me figure it out. The room was very still. Abigail Carter looked at her husband, this proud, guarded, slow man, who had ridden 4 days into the Virginia mountains to say a thing he had never said to anyone, and she felt something move in her chest that she had been keeping very carefully still for a very long time. She did not let it move too far. Not yet. She was not ready for too far yet. But she let it move. "There's a supper at the Thompsons on Saturday," she said at last, her voice quieter than usual. "Eli Thompson invited half the village. It's not formal, it's just people." She looked at him. "Come to supper. Talk to people. See what this place is." She paused. "And I'll think about what I want to tell you." "That's all?" "That's everything," she said. "For now, that is everything there is." He nodded. Once. Slowly. The way a man nods when he is accepting terms he did not set and knows that is exactly right. "Saturday," he said. "Saturday." She moved toward the door of the parlor, the small, clear gesture of a woman ending a conversation on her own terms. "Good night, Samuel." He picked up his hat. He walked to the door. He stopped on the threshold, the way he had not stopped at the breakfast table on that July morning, stopped and turned back and looked at her with the full, direct, unguarded attention she had waited 2 years to receive. "Good night, Abigail." He walked out into the summer dark. She stood alone in the Widow Harmon's parlor, with her hand on the doorframe, and her heart doing something complicated and unscheduled, and she breathed exactly once, slow, careful, before she let herself feel any of it. She didn't sleep well on Friday night. She lay in the narrow bed above the Widow Harmon's kitchen and stared at the ceiling and had an argument with herself that went on longer than she would have liked and ended as most honest arguments with oneself do in a draw. Part of her said he rode 4 days. He said you specifically, distinctly you. He sat across from you and listened to 2 years of things he should have already known, and he did not flinch, and he did not explain, and he did not excuse. That is something. That is in fact more than something. The other part of her said 3 weeks ago you were furniture. Both parts were right. That was the problem. She was dressed and at the survey table by the time Margaret came downstairs. "You look terrible," Margaret said. "Thank you, Mama." "Did you sleep?" "Some." She moved a deed map to the left. "I'm fine." "You're fine the way a fence post is fine," Margaret said, pouring her own coffee. "Upright and not going anywhere and not admitting to anything." She sat down. "He said something last night, didn't he?" "Several things." "Something that landed." Abigail was quiet for a moment. "He said he missed me. Specifically." She kept her eyes on the map. "Not the house. Not the accounts. Me." Margaret wrapped both hands around her cup. And I don't know yet whether that's enough to build anything on." She looked up. "But I know it's true. I could tell it was true. And that changes the shape of things somewhat." "Somewhat," Margaret repeated. "Don't push me, Mama." "I'm not pushing. I'm just noting that you ironed your good dress last night and you thought I was asleep." Abigail looked at her mother. Margaret looked back with the serene expression of a woman holding an entirely unassailable position. "The supper is a community event," Abigail said. "It is appropriate to dress well for a community event." "Of course it is." "That's all it is." Naturally. They looked at each other for another moment. Then Abigail went back to her map, and Margaret went back to her coffee, and neither of them said anything else about the good dress. The Thompson supper was held in Eli's barn, which had been cleared and laid with tables and benches, and the combined cooking of approximately 14 women who each believed their contribution was the best thing on the table. By the time Abigail arrived with Margaret, it was full and loud and warm, with the easy, uncomplicated pleasure of people who genuinely liked each other. She had been in Crest Hollow long enough now that people called her name when she walked in. Jeb Harmon's wife pressed a dish of corn pudding into her hands and told her the resurvey couldn't come soon enough. The school teacher waved from across the room. The widow Harmon's sister wanted to talk about an easement matter on her east property. 3 children she didn't know by name ran past her knees and disappeared. She was for the first time in 2 years somewhere she belonged. Samuel arrived 20 minutes later. He appeared in the barn doorway in the plain clothes he'd traveled in. He had not. She noticed immediately gone back to Charlottesville for anything finer, and he stood for a moment in that doorway with the particular stillness of a man who has arrived somewhere he does not know the rules of and is paying close attention before he moves. She watched him scan the room, watched him find her, watched something in his expression settle, not relax, not quite, but settle the way a compass finds north. She lifted her chin in acknowledgement. He crossed the room toward her. "Mrs. Carter." "Mr. Carter." She handed him a plate. "Eat something before Jeb Harmon gets to the corn pudding. He has no restraint." He looked at the plate, looked at her. Something moved at the corner of his mouth. "I'll keep that in mind." He was not, she discovered over the next 2 hours, as incapable of human interaction as she had occasionally suspected. Left to his own devices at the Carter estate, surrounded by his mother's precise social architecture, he had always seemed more monument than man, something to be respected and worked around. Here, without the architecture, he was simply a person at a table, and people at tables were manageable. He was talking to Eli Thompson when she checked on him an hour in which was either a good sign or a complicated one. Eli had the look of a man conducting an assessment, and Samuel had the look of a man who knew he was being assessed and had decided not to pretend otherwise. "He's asking you something," she said to Eli when she came close enough. "Asking how a man like me ended up running a community mill when I started as a blacksmith," Eli said pleasantly. "And what did you say?" "I said a man ends up where he's needed, not where he planned." He looked at Samuel. He said that was a more interesting answer than he expected. Samuel looked at Abigail. "I said it was also more interesting than any answer I've gotten at a supper table in Charlottesville in the last 5 years." She looked at him for a moment. "That is perhaps not a very high bar." "No," he said. "I'm beginning to understand that." Eli Thompson watched this exchange with the quiet attention of a man filing something away. "Chahai." The first real laugh came an hour later, and it caught them both off guard. It was Jeb Harmon's doing, technically. Jeb, who had consumed more corn pudding than any single person reasonably should have had, decided that the evening required dancing, and had recruited the fiddle player and 3 other men of equivalent enthusiasm, and had then turned to Samuel with the beaming confidence of a man who has had enough to drink to believe any idea he has is a good one. "You dance, Mr. Carter." Samuel looked at the cleared space in the middle of the barn that was rapidly acquiring couples. He looked at Abigail. She looked back at him with the composed expression of a woman watching to see what he would do. "I know how," he said carefully. "That's all you need." Jeb slapped him on the shoulder. "Go on then." Samuel turned to Abigail. He held out his hand. He did it the way he did things when he'd decided, without hesitation, without performance. Just the offered hand and the question in his eyes that he didn't put into words. She looked at the hand. She took it. They were not. It turned out a disaster at dancing. They had danced twice before at county functions in Charlottesville, and both times it had been stiff and formal, and conducted with the spatial precision of 2 people who did not know each other well enough to be comfortable at close range. This time the fiddle was considerably less refined, and the floor was considerably less level, and Jeb Harmon kept bumping into them from the left, and somewhere in the managed chaos of all of that, something gave way. He spun her a little faster than the step required, because Harmon had just lurched into them again from the right, and she caught his arm to steady herself. And it was slightly too fast and slightly too close, and she started laughing before she could stop it. Not the polite laughter of a woman at a county supper. Real laughter, surprised, unprepared, unmanaged. The kind that comes from somewhere lower than the throat. He looked down at her, and then, and this was the thing she would return to later. Lying awake, turning it over, he laughed too. It came out of him like something that hadn't been used in a long time. A little rusty at the edges, but real. "Your elbow," she managed. "Harmon's fault." "It is emphatically your elbow." "Mrs. Carter, I assure you." "Samuel." She looked up at him, still half laughing. "Your elbow." He looked down. His elbow had indeed done something inadvisable to the vicinity of her hat. He straightened it. The hat was lopsided. She adjusted it with one hand, without letting go of his other one, and they stood for a moment in the middle of Eli Thompson's barn, with the fiddle still going, and Jeb Harmon careening away to the left, and the particular kind of stillness that exists inside a loud room when two people find each other's eyes. "Abigail," he said quietly enough that only she could hear. "Don't," she said, just as quietly. "Not yet. Just dance." He nodded. He took her hand again, and they danced, and for one uncomplicated, unguarded song, in the middle of a mountain summer, they were simply two people who were figuring out the distance between them. Margaret, from her bench on the side of the room, watched with both hands folded in her lap, and said a quiet prayer of the specifically maternal variety. The letter arrived Sunday morning, and it hit the widow Harmon's kitchen table like a stone dropped from a height. It was from Lydia. Not the careful managed Lydia of the pre-wedding letter. Not the tight-smiled Lydia of the breakfast table. This was a Lydia who had been sitting alone in the Carter estate for a month, with no one to manage, and no one to audit, and nothing to arrange, and had arrived at several conclusions, and put them all into 4 pages of densely written prose. Abigail read it standing at the table. Margaret watched her face. The first page was about the household. The factor needed instructions. The East Parlor had developed a damp problem that required attention. These were practical matters, and Abigail read through them without expression. The second page was about Samuel. Lydia's opinion of Samuel's decision to travel to Crest Hollow was expressed in the specific layered way Lydia expressed disapproval, not directly, but in the accumulation of concerned questions. Was Samuel well? Was he eating properly? Was he aware of the business matters that had been left unaddressed? Did he understand that certain obligations could not be deferred indefinitely? Abigail's expression had not changed. The third page was about the Meadows land. She read slowly, read it again. Then she set the letter down. "What is it?" Margaret asked. "She's had the Meadows land surveyed," Abigail said. "Her own surveyor. She says—" She paused. "She says the northern parcel is worth considerably more than anyone understood at the time of the marriage arrangement. There's iron in the ground. A surveyor Lydia hired from Richmond confirmed it last week." She looked up. She is suggesting in language that is technically polite that this changes certain considerations regarding the arrangement. Margaret stared. "She's saying it was worth more than your father knew." "She's saying it was worth more than my father knew." Abigail's voice was very even. "Which means when your father negotiated his debt relief in exchange for the land, he didn't know what he was giving away." She picked up the letter again. "And Lydia. Did Lydia know?" Margaret's voice had gone sharp. The question sat between them. Abigail read the third page one more time. "She doesn't say." She set it down. "But she arranged that marriage. She wrote to me before the wedding. She managed the terms." She looked at her mother. "Mama, someone knew the land was worth more. Someone made sure that arrangement happened." Margaret pressed her hand flat on the table. "Abigail, I need to talk to Samuel." "Jack." She found him at Deacon's, just finished with breakfast, about to go for a walk. He took one look at her face and put down his hat. "What happened?" She handed him the letter. He read it. His face changed slowly, progressively, in a way that was uncomfortable to watch because it was entirely unmanaged. He was not performing a reaction. He was having one. He set the letter on the table. He was quiet for a moment. "I didn't know about the iron," he said. "I know." She looked at him. "Did your mother—" He was quiet for a long time. Long enough that the answer was effectively already spoken before he said it. "I don't know," he said. "I don't know, Abigail. I need you to believe that I genuinely don't know. Then find out. He looked at her. If she did. Find out first, she said. Then we'll talk about if. He wrote to Lydia that afternoon. He did not soften it. He asked directly whether she had known about the iron in the Meadows land prior to the marriage arrangement, and he asked it in terms that made clear he was not looking for a careful answer, but an honest one. Lydia's reply came in 3 days. It was one paragraph. She had heard a rumor. She had not confirmed it. She had believed the arrangement served multiple purposes and had proceeded on that basis. She regretted that it now presented a complication. Samuel read it once. He brought it to Abigail without a word. She read it. She folded it. She set it on the table. Multiple purposes, she said. Yes. She built an arrangement that secured valuable land from a family that didn't know it was valuable, Abigail said. And she wrote to me before the wedding to make sure I understood it was a practical transaction, and I should not expect anything more. She looked at Samuel. She managed everything, didn't she? From the beginning. Yes, he said, and the word came out of him like something being put down that he had been carrying for a long time. She did. And you let her. I let her. He did not look away. I was comfortable, and she was competent, and I did not look closely at the mechanisms because I did not need to. And that was a failure, Abigail. That was my failure, not hers. Mine. She looked at him for a long assessing moment. What do you intend to do about the land? She asked. It's your land, he said simply. She blinked. Samuel, it was your father's. It came to the arrangement because your father didn't understand what he had. If there is iron in that ground, the profit from it should go to you and your mother. It's not a negotiation. It's just what's right. He paused. I'll have the papers drawn up however you want them. Your name or your mother's, whatever gives you the most security. He looked at her. I should have done this at the beginning. I should have looked more carefully at what the arrangement asked of your family and done more to balance it. He paused again. I am doing it now. It's late. I know it's late, but I am doing it. Abigail said nothing for a long moment. She was looking at him the way she looked at survey maps, searching for the place where the line was true, where the bearing was honest. She found it. Sit down, she said finally. I'll make coffee. We have things to discuss. Mate. They talked for 3 hours that afternoon. Not about the land. After the first 30 minutes, those details were settled quickly with the efficient practicality of two competent people who understood property and law and what was fair. They talked about everything else. He asked about her father. She told him about the man he had been, about the land he had loved, about the debt that had come from 3 bad harvests in a row, and the particular quiet devastation of watching something you've built slowly undone. She told him about her childhood running those fields, about her father teaching her to read a survey map on a Saturday morning with a cup of bad coffee between them. He listened. He did not summarize. He did not offer solutions. He just listened with the full, unhurried attention she had spent 2 years waiting for, and she talked until she was empty of it, and then sat quietly on the other side of the silence. Then he asked, "What do you love to read?" She looked at him. "What? You?" He was looking at her with steady, direct eyes. "I realized I don't know what you love to read. I've lived with you for 2 years, and I cannot answer that question. I am asking it now." She looked at him for a moment that went on longer than expected. "History," she said finally. "Settlement history specifically. Land grants. How communities establish themselves. How people build things from nothing." She paused. "And poetry sometimes, late at night." He nodded, slowly, processing. "Who? Pope, Dryden. Sometimes someone more modern." She tilted her head slightly. "You're making a list." "I'm not making a list." "You have your list face." He looked startled. "I have a—" "You do." And something in her voice was softer than either of them had been expecting. "You get a specific expression when you're committing something to memory. You've had it twice in the last 5 minutes. He was quiet for a moment. "You've been watching me carefully," he said. "I've been watching you for 2 years," she said. "What else was I going to do?" The weight of that settled on him slowly. He sat with it. "I'm going to ask you something," he said carefully. "And I want you to answer it honestly and not carefully. Just honestly." "All right. Are you happy here in this place, in this life you've built?" He looked at her. Not versus the Carter house. Not relatively. Just, are you happy? She didn't answer immediately. She took the question seriously, which was itself an answer of a kind. She looked at the kitchen around her, the Widow Harmon's plain wooden table, the survey maps she'd brought in that morning, her mother's Bible on the shelf, the sound of Crest Hollow outside the window. "Yes," she said. "I am. Good." He said it with something that sounded underneath the single syllable like relief. "Then whatever comes next, wherever you decide you want to be, I want you to have kept that. I don't want—" He stopped. "I don't want to be the reason you're smaller than you ought to be. I've already done that once. I won't do it again." She looked at him for a long moment. "Samuel," she said quietly. "Yes." "When you go back to Charlottesville—" She stopped. "If," he said, not correcting her, just offering the alternative. She looked at him. "If," he said again more quietly. The word sat between them. If. Provisional. Open-ended. The most honest word in the English language when used by a man who was done pretending he knew how this ended. She stood. She moved to the door. She stopped with her hand on the frame, the same gesture, the same position as 3 nights ago when she'd sent him out into the dark. "Come to the resurvey Thursday," she said. "The Harmon boundary markers." "You want me there?" She looked back at him. "I think you'd find it interesting," she said. "And I think—" She paused. "I think it would be useful for you to see it. See what it looks like when something is handled fairly." She said it without sharpness. Just truth. When the right line is drawn in the right place and everyone walks away knowing exactly where they stand. He held her gaze. "I'll be there," he said. She nodded. She walked out. She got as far as the road before she realized her hands were not entirely steady again, and she stood for a moment in the August afternoon and breathed the mountain air and told herself to be patient. She was good at patient. She had been practicing for 2 years. Janbansegd, Thursday's resurvey went exactly as she had planned it, which was to say, it went not at all as she had planned it and yet ended correctly anyway. Jeb Harmon had a last-minute objection to the placement of the second marker. The county surveyor she'd brought in from the Valley Road got into an argument with the eldest Harmon boy about the methodology. One of the other families produced a completely different deed that no one had seen before, and for 20 minutes it looked as though the whole carefully assembled resolution was going to collapse like a poorly built fence in a stiff wind. Abigail stood in the middle of it with both hands up and her voice steady and managed all of it. The new deed, the methodology argument. Jeb Harmon's objection, with the particular combination of firmness and patience that had become over 3 weeks in Crest Hollow, her signature. Samuel watched all of it from the edge of the group. He did not intervene. He did not offer his opinions. He watched. At the end of it, when the markers were in the ground and 4 families had shaken hands over a boundary line they could all agree on. He walked to her side. She was putting away the survey maps. "Well," she said without looking up. He was quiet for a moment. "Your father taught you this," he said. "He did." "He taught you well." She looked up. He was looking at her with the full, open, undefended expression she had seen only twice before, once in Eli Thompson's barn, and once across a table in the Widow Harmon's kitchen when she had told him about the letter. "Samuel," she said. "I know," he said. "I know I have a long way to go. I'm not asking you to forget any of it. I'm not asking you to pretend the last 2 years were something other than what they were." He looked at the survey stake nearest to him, the new marker precise and clear. I'm just asking to be in the same place as you. For a while. Doing whatever is useful. Without the arrangement being the whole of it. She looked at him. There's a stone wall on the far side of Eli Thompson's property that needs repointing, she said. He blinked. I beg your pardon. Eli mentioned it last week. He can't do it himself, his shoulder. She began folding the last map. I told him I'd find someone. It's a full day's work, maybe two. Hard work. She looked at him with those clear, steady eyes. Can you do that? He looked at his hands. Looked at her. Yes, he said. I can do that. Then you can stay, she said. For now, you can stay. And that was not a love confession, and it was not a reconciliation, and it was not the resolution of 2 years of careful hurt. It was simply an honest woman making room carefully and on her own terms for the possibility that the man standing in front of her was becoming someone she might in time want to know. It was, all things considered, more than she had thought she would offer. She was beginning to understand the beginning of something real. Samuel Carter repointed Eli Thompson's stone wall in 2 days. He showed up at dawn on Friday with his sleeves already rolled and his coat left at Deacon's, and he worked with the focused, unhurried competence of a man who understood physical labor even if he had not practiced it recently. By mid-morning, the first section was done. By evening, half the wall was solid. Eli Thompson brought him water twice and said nothing both times, which was from Eli high praise. Abigail passed the wall on her way back from the county surveyor's office on Friday afternoon. She stopped. She looked at the work. She looked at Samuel covered in mortar dust, squinting at a stone he was fitting into place, entirely unaware of being observed. She stood there longer than she'd intended. Margaret, who was walking 2 steps behind her, came to a stop at her elbow. She looked at Samuel, looked at her daughter's face. Don't say it, Abigail said. I haven't said anything. You're thinking very loudly. I'm thinking nothing at all, Margaret said serenely. I'm simply appreciating the quality of the stonework. Abigail walked on. She was aware without turning around that Margaret was smiling. Samuel finished the wall on Saturday. Eli inspected it with the thorough attention of a man who knew exactly what good work looked like and was not going to confirm it until he was certain. Well, Samuel said. Eli ran his hand along the top course. He checked 2 of the corner joints. He stood back and looked at the whole thing. It'll hold, he said. It'll hold for 30 years, Samuel said. Eli looked at him. Reckon it will. He paused. You've done this kind of work before. My father's farm, before the estate. Samuel picked up his jacket. He believed a man who couldn't maintain his own property had no business owning it. Smart man? He was. He looked at the wall. I got comfortable, stopped doing and started directing. He paused. There's a difference. There is. Eli picked up his own jacket. You know what Abigail's been doing these past weeks? She hasn't been directing. She's been doing. Herself, with her own hands alongside people. He looked at Samuel. That's why they trust her. Not because she knows more than them. Because she works with them. Samuel was quiet for a moment. I know. Do you? He looked at Eli. I'm learning, he said. That's the honest answer. I'm learning. Eli considered that, nodded once. Supper's at 7, he said. You're invited. Samuel looked at him. Is Abigail coming? She's coming. A pause. Then I'll be there. Why? He found her on the porch of the widow Harmon's house before supper, sitting with a letter in her hands, and an expression he had learned over the past 10 days to read with some accuracy. It was not her composed expression. It was not her working expression. It was the one underneath both of those, the one that appeared when something had caught her genuinely off guard. What happened? He said. She looked up. She held out the letter without a word. He took it. He read it. It was from Lydia. Not a letter this time, a single line on a card in his mother's precise handwriting. I am arriving Wednesday. There are matters that require discussion in person. LH, Samuel looked at the card. He looked at Abigail. He said with considerable restraint, "I didn't ask her to come." "I know. I can write and tell her." "Don't." Abigail stood. She took the card back. She looked at it for a moment. "Let her come." She said it with the calm, certain voice she used when she had made a decision and was done second-guessing it. "It's time." He looked at her. "Abigail." "Samuel." She met his eyes. "I am not the woman who curtsied and walked out of that dining room anymore. I am not going to flinch from your mother on my own ground." She folded the card. "Let her come." He nodded slowly. "All right." She put the card in her pocket and picked up her shawl. "We're going to be late for supper," she said. "Come on." He followed her, and it occurred to him, following this woman down the road toward Eli Thompson's house in the last of the summer evening, that he had never once in 2 years of marriage walked behind her, had never been in the position of following where she led. He had always been ahead or parallel or simply somewhere else entirely. He found to his considerable surprise that he did not mind. Chook. Lydia Carter arrived on Wednesday as promised in a hired coach that was considerably less comfortable than what she was accustomed to, and emerged from it with the expression of a woman who has endured something beneath her standards and intends to say so. She did not get the chance. Abigail was at the road when the coach stopped. She was standing, not waiting anxiously, not bracing herself, simply standing with her hands at her sides and her chin level and the full grounded composure of a woman on her own ground. Lydia stepped down. She looked at Abigail. Abigail looked back. "Mrs. Hawthorne," Abigail said. "Welcome to Crest Hollow." Lydia took in the village, the road, the mill in the distance, the widow Harmon's modest house. Her expression moved through several things and settled on something that was carefully neutral. "Abigail," she said, "Samuel's at the Thompson property. I'll take you to him." "I'd like to speak with you first." A pause. "All right." They sat in the widow Harmon's kitchen, the same kitchen where Abigail had read Lydia's letter, where she had talked to Margaret about what she wanted, where she and Samuel had spent 3 hours talking for the first time about everything that mattered. Lydia sat across the table and folded her hands in the precise, composed way she always folded them, and for a moment the room felt like it was waiting. "I wrote you a letter," Lydia said, "before your wedding." "I know. I've been thinking about it." Lydia looked at her hands, then up. "I told myself it was practical, that I was being honest with you about the terms of the arrangement, so you would not arrive with false expectations." She paused. "I have told myself that for 3 years. It has recently become more difficult to maintain." Abigail said nothing. She sat and waited. She was very good at waiting. "I was protecting Samuel," Lydia said. "That's what I believed. I believed an arrangement clearly understood on both sides was kinder than one that bred illusions." She stopped. "I did not consider that what I was actually doing was telling a young woman before she had walked through the door that she should not expect to matter." She looked at Abigail. "That was wrong. It was unkind. And I am not accustomed to being unkind without reason." The word sat between them. Without reason, not without cause. Lydia was too honest to pretend the reason hadn't existed. "You knew about the iron?" Abigail said quietly. Lydia's hands moved slightly, just slightly. "I had heard a rumor. You arranged a marriage that secured valuable land from a family who didn't know what they had." "I arranged a marriage that saved your mother from poverty," Lydia said. And there was something sharp in it, not cruel, but insistent, the voice of a woman who has run through this argument with herself many times and is tired of the parts that don't resolve cleanly. Your father's debt was real. Your situation was real. The arrangement gave your family security. That is also true. "It is," Abigail said. "And the land was also true. And the letter was also true. All of it is true at the same time." Lydia looked at her. And then, and this was the thing Abigail had not anticipated, the thing that shifted the entire shape of the conversation, Lydia's expression changed. The architecture came down. Not completely. Not in any way that was careless or unmeasured, but enough. I underestimated you, Lydia said, from the beginning. I saw a plain, quiet girl from a diminished family, and I thought I understood exactly what you were. She stopped. I did not understand at all. No, Abigail said. You didn't. I am telling you that now. Lydia pressed her folded hands flat on the table. I am not asking you to forgive it. I am not certain I deserve that. I am telling you because you deserve to hear it said plainly without management or careful language. She met Abigail's eyes. You are not what I expected. You are considerably more. And what I did, the letter, the land, the years of I allowed things in that house that I should not have allowed. My son's behavior was shaped in part by what I modeled. She paused. That is on me. The kitchen was very quiet. Abigail looked at this woman, this proud, sharp, controlling woman who had made her life smaller for 2 years and had now traveled 4 days into the mountains to sit across a plain kitchen table and say so. You came a long way to say that, Abigail said. Yes. You could have written. I could have. Lydia's chin lifted slightly. I chose not to. Abigail looked at her for a long moment, at the straight spine and the folded hands and the careful eyes that were underneath all of it, asking for something they didn't know how to ask for directly. Margaret is at the mill with Eli Thompson, Abigail said. She'll be back by noon. Stay for lunch. Lydia blinked. Stay for lunch, Mrs. Hawthorne. Abigail stood. She moved to put the kettle on. We have things to discuss, and I don't intend to discuss them on a bad cup of Coach Road coffee. A pause that lasted exactly the right length of time. All right, Lydia said. My child. Samuel found them at the kitchen table 2 hours later, with the household accounts from the Carter estate spread between them and both of them talking at the same time. He stood in the doorway and looked at this, his mother and his wife. Heads bent over the same papers, Abigail pointing at something with her pencil, and Lydia making a note in her own handwriting in the margin, and felt something in his chest move that he couldn't name. There's a discrepancy in the July figures, Abigail was saying. Here and here. Mrs. Holt's been compensating for it, but she shouldn't have to. The factors system and my system don't align, Lydia said. They never have. I've been adjusting it manually each quarter. Then we need a single system that both of you can use without adjustment. Abigail tapped the page. If you show me yours, I'll build something that sits between them. That would take considerable. 2 days, Abigail said. 3 at most. Lydia looked at her. Something that was not quite a smile crossed her face. You've always been organized. I've always had to be. Lydia received that in silence. Then, yes, I suppose you have. Samuel cleared his throat. Both women looked up. He looked between them at his mother's carefully neutral expression and Abigail's calm, settled one. Should I come back? He said. No, Abigail said. Sit down. We need to talk about the estate. He sat down. The conversation that followed was the longest, most direct, most honest conversation the three of them had ever had. It covered the estate accounts, the Meadows land, and the iron in it, the legal transfer of the northern parcel to Margaret Carter's name, and the management arrangements for the household going forward. Lydia said very little during the parts about the land. She had brought a solicitor's letter with her already prepared signing over any claim to the iron revenue. Abigail had not expected that. She took the letter, read it, and looked at Lydia. This is already signed, she said. It is. You did this before you came. I did. Abigail looked at the letter, at Lydia. Why? Lydia folded her hands. Because it was right, she said. As though that were the entire answer. And perhaps from Lydia it was. Samuel watched his wife look at his mother for a long moment. He watched something change between them. Not warmth, exactly. Not yet, perhaps not ever completely. But something. An adjustment. A recalibration. Two precise, careful women deciding with some deliberation where the new line was going to be. Thank you, Abigail said. Lydia nodded once. "Don't thank me," she said. "I'm 3 years late." The question of what came next arrived on a Thursday evening 9 days after Lydia, with the matter-of-fact timing of all important questions that have been circling for a while and finally land. It was Margaret who asked it. She waited until they were all four at the supper table. Lydia had stayed, which had surprised everyone, including Lydia, and the meal was finished, and the conversation had gone quiet in the comfortable way that happens when people have run through the immediate business and arrived at the thing underneath it. "What are we doing?" Margaret said. She looked around the table. "All four of us. What are we actually doing? Because I'm 61 years old, and I would like someone to tell me where I'm going to be sleeping 6 months from now." Lydia looked at her. Something that was entirely unambiguously a smile crossed her face, the first real one Abigail had ever seen from her. "A fair question," Lydia said. Everyone looked at Abigail. She had known this was coming. She had been thinking about it for days, turning it over the way she turned over a survey problem, not forcing it, just letting it sit until the true line became visible. She thought she could see it now. "I'm not going back to what I was," she said. She said it to Samuel specifically, clearly and without softening. "I'm not going back to managing a house in silence and being convenient and sitting at breakfast waiting to be described. That is finished." "I know," Samuel said. "I need you to understand what I mean by that. Not, I want more consideration. Not, I want to be treated better. I mean the way the household runs, the way decisions are made, the way we talk to each other. All of it changes. Or, I stay here." He looked at her steadily. "Tell me what you want it to look like." She had not expected that. She had been prepared for negotiation, for resistance, for the particular defensive pride of a man being asked to rebuild something he'd thought was already built. She had not been prepared for him to simply ask. She told him. She told him about the accounts and how they should be managed jointly, about the household decisions and how they should be made with her voice equal to his, about the social obligations and how she would no longer manage them invisibly from behind, that if a supper was her work, it would be known as her work. About Lydia, and how the relationship would need new terms that all three of them agreed to, not terms that were simply assumed. About her own work, the survey reading the community work, the particular capability she had discovered she had, and how that was not going to be set aside to make the Carter estate more comfortable. She talked for 20 minutes. She did not soften it. She did not hedge. When she was finished, the table was quiet. Samuel said, "Yes." She blinked. "Yes. Yes to all of it." He looked at her across the table. "Yes, Abigail. All of it." "Samuel, I'm serious. This isn't—" "I know you're serious." He leaned forward slightly. "I am telling you yes, because I mean it, not because I'm agreeing to make this conversation end. I mean every word of it." He paused. "I want you to come home. Not back to what it was. Home to what it could be. With you in it, fully in it, the way you've been here." He looked at her. "I have watched you for 10 days in this place, and I have seen what you look like when you're allowed to be entirely yourself. I want that in my house. Our house." His jaw worked for a moment. "I want to know what you love to read. I want to know what you're thinking at breakfast. I want you to talk to me, the way you talk to Eli and Margaret and every person in this village." He stopped. "I want to be worth talking to." The table was very still. Margaret had her hands folded in her lap and was looking at the middle distance with the expression of a woman who is trying not to cry and is mostly succeeding. Lydia was looking at her son with an expression Abigail had never seen on her face before. Not pride exactly. Something older than pride. Recognition. Abigail looked at Samuel, this man who had ridden 4 days into the mountains and repointed a stone wall and sat at a plain kitchen table and said yes to every term she'd offered, and was now asking with more humility than she had thought him capable of to be given the chance to be worth something to her. One more thing, she said. Anything. If I go back, Crest Hollow stays mine. She kept her eyes on his. I keep the work here. Not every week, not always, but it stays. Eli's community. The people here. What I've built here. It doesn't disappear because I go back to a bigger house. He didn't hesitate. Of course. I mean it, Samuel. I know you do. He looked at her. So do I. She held his gaze for a long moment, long enough to read it the way she read survey maps looking for the true line, the honest bearing, the place where it held. She found it. All right, she said. They left Crest Hollow on a Saturday, all four of them in the hired coach. Lydia had come in with Abigail's survey maps rolled in her bag, and Margaret's Bible on her lap, and Eli Thompson standing at the end of the road to see them off. Abigail climbed in last. She stopped at the coach door and turned back to Eli. I'll be back in October, she said. The winter cases. He nodded. I'll have them ready. He looked at her for a moment. You did good here. We're not done. No, he said. You're not. He looked past her at the coach, at Samuel visible through the window, then back at her. He did good too, for what it's worth. I know, she said. I saw. She climbed in. The coach moved. She did not look back at Crest Hollow, not because she was leaving it behind, but because she knew, with the certainty she reserved for things that were simply true, that she was carrying it with her. Everything she had built there, everything she had become there, was packed as surely as her survey maps and her mother's Bible. She was not going back. She was going forward, and there was a difference, and she knew it better than anyone. Sir, the Carter estate was different. Not dramatically, not in the way of new furniture or moved rooms, but different the way a house is different when the people inside it have changed. The first morning back, she came downstairs and found Samuel already at the breakfast table. He looked up when she came in. Good morning, he said. Good morning. He poured her coffee before she had sat down. He set it at her place without a word. She sat. She looked at the cup. She looked at him. What are your plans today? She said. He looked at her with the straightforward, undefended attention she had come to understand was what he looked like when he was actually present. The East Fields need looking at, and I thought if you have time this afternoon, you might look at the property maps with me. There's a boundary on the north parcel I've never been entirely certain of. She picked up her coffee. I have time after 2. After 2 then. He went back to his correspondence. She reached for her bread. Across the table, just the two of them, the room was neither cold nor carefully managed. It was simply inhabited. Lydia appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later. She looked at the table, at Samuel reading his correspondence, at Abigail with her bread and her coffee and the small notebook she'd pulled out to record a thought about the north parcel boundary. Something in Lydia's expression moved. It was subtle and brief, and would have been invisible to anyone who had not spent 2 years learning to read this woman's smallest shifts. She sat down. The linens in the east parlor, she said. Abigail looked up. Are fine, Lydia said. I checked them this morning. They're perfectly fine. Abigail held her gaze for a moment. Then she went back to her notebook. Thank you, she said. I'll look at them this week anyway. Lydia reached for the coffee pot. Of course, she said. Nothing more. It was not a peace treaty. It was not a transformation. It was two women at a breakfast table having decided with full understanding of what they were deciding that the future was worth more than the argument. Samuel looked up from his correspondence and saw both of them, his mother with her coffee, his wife with her notebook, occupying the same room without casualness and without war, in the careful, new, hard-won way of people who have chosen honesty over comfort and are finding against some expectation that it holds. He went back to his letters. He was smiling slightly. He didn't perform it. It simply happened. The north parcel boundary turned out when Abigail looked at the maps that afternoon with Samuel beside her to have been incorrectly recorded at the county office for 11 years. The original grant line was 4 degrees off from what had been filed. She showed him how she knew. She walked him through the methodology, the original survey bearing the way it compared to the county record, the discrepancy that had accumulated over a decade into a line that was quietly significantly wrong. He listened with his arms on the table and his full attention on the map, and he asked questions, not directing questions, not the questions of a man trying to demonstrate that he understood before he'd finished listening, but real questions. The questions of a man who genuinely did not know and wanted to. She answered all of them. They sat at that table for 2 hours, and when they were finished, the map was corrected and marked and ready to file, and Samuel was looking at her with the expression she had come to call his recalibrating expression, the one that appeared when something had shifted his understanding of something. "You could do this professionally," he said. "I am doing it professionally," she said, "in Crest Hollow. I'd like to expand it." He was quiet for a moment. "What would you need?" She looked at him. "A proper office, access to the county records in Charlottesville." She paused. "Your name on the correspondence. Not because my work requires your name, but because the county clerk will respond faster to a Carter." He held her gaze. "Done." "I'm serious. So am I." He looked at the map. "Abigail, I want you to build it, whatever it looks like. I want you to build it, and I want to watch you do it, and I will put my name on whatever correspondence needs my name without comment or condition." He paused. "You were managing things from behind for 2 years. I'm asking you to manage them from the front, from now on." She looked at him. She did not let herself look away or qualify or soften what she was feeling. "All right," she said. He reached across the table. Not quickly, carefully, deliberately, the way he did things when he was certain. His hand covered hers on the map. She turned her hand over and held it. They stayed like that for a moment. 2 people at a table with a corrected map between them, holding on in the quiet, ordinary, entirely real way of 2 people who have finally, after a long time, found the true line. That evening, Abigail Carter sat at the writing desk in the room that was now properly and completely her own study, because that had been the first thing she'd asked for on returning, and Samuel had arranged it without question, and she wrote a letter to Eli Thompson. She told him the north parcel boundary had been wrong for 11 years, and she'd corrected it. She told him she would be in Crest Hollow in October with 3 pending cases and a plan for the winter disputes. She told him that Margaret was well, and that the Carter estate was adjusting, and that the breakfast table was on balance considerably quieter and considerably better than it had been. She signed it. She folded it. She set it with the morning's outgoing correspondence. Then she sat for a moment in her own study, in her own house, with her own maps on her own desk, and she thought about a July morning that had started with a curtsy and a walk out a door. She had walked out a woman who knew what she was worth. She had come back a woman who had proved it. Not to Samuel, not to Lydia, to herself. That was the only proof that had ever mattered, and she had gone to the mountains and earned it with her own hands and her own mind, and come home carrying it like something no one could take. The woman who had sat at that breakfast table waiting to be seen was gone. She was not coming back. In her place was a woman who saw herself clearly, who knew the exact coordinates of her own value,